There are legends in Louisiana history that sometimes take a life of their own. These legends ascend into popular American culture, which leads to bastardization, misinterpretation, and often insulting caricatures of our culture. Looking at you, Princess and the Frog. But other legends can be so evil and malicious that not even horrible Hollywood writers can ruin it, try as they might. One of those legends is known as the Axeman. But first, go to patreon.com/LouisianaDread to gain access to more Louisiana horror stories like the one you're about to watch. After the Civil War, New Orleans had a huge increase in Italian immigrants. In fact, more Italians funneled through the port of New Orleans than all of New York and New Jersey. They had so many Sicilian and Italian immigrants living in the French Quarter that the easternmost section after Jackson Square became known as Little Palermo. These Italians faced intense racism once they arrived, so many of them left the city and went across the river to the West Bank and became farmers and grocers. With them, however, came the advent of organized crime. The Mafia began in the Crescent City before it ever reached the Big Apple. Now, the police pretty much had their hands full with the different rival families that would dot the landscape. So many shootings and knife fights occurred along Decatur Street, for example, that it was nicknamed Vendetta Alley. So it wasn't so shocking when Joseph and Catherine Maggio showed up dead in their apartment above their grocery store in May of 1918. At first glance, it might seem like these two hardworking Italians were slain by the Mafia. In fact, that's what literally everyone thought. But if one looks closely at how they died, it might raise some eyebrows. While the two were asleep, the killer crept into their home and cut their throats with a straight razor, then proceeded to completely bash their heads in with an axe. Nothing was stolen from the home because all of their valuables were in clear sight and still left untouched. The bloody clothing of the killer was found at the scene because he apparently changed into something clean just before leaving the scene. An eerie message was found written in chalk that said, "Mrs. Joseph Maggio will sit up tonight. Just right, Miss Tony." Immediately, arrests were made, and of course they were all Italian, but were all released later due to the lack of evidence. About a month later in June, another grocer, Louis Bessemer, and his mistress, Harriet Lowe, were attacked by a mysterious figure. Louis was hit with an axe above his right temple and Lowe over her left ear. They were found the next morning, laying in their own blood, but miraculously were still alive. Harriet Lowe had extensive damage to her face and had corrective surgery, but would die only 2 days after the surgery. Wild thing though, before she dies, she told authorities that she believed it to be her husband that attacked her. Louis Bessemer was promptly arrested and served 9 months in jail before a jury deliberated for about 10 whole minutes and found him not guilty. After that, he was released from jail, but still no attacker was found. A couple months go by without incident until August 5th, when an 8-month pregnant woman named Mrs. Schneider woke up to see a dark figure standing over her. Now, if you've been keeping up with the channel for a while, you might remember the story of the cauchemar. Although similar in some respects, the cauchemar usually just scares you while you're under sleep paralysis. This dark figure, however, proceeded to beat Mrs. Schneider over the head repeatedly with what authorities presumed to be a lamp. Now, she was found by her husband, Ed Schneider, when he got home from work shortly after midnight. Surprisingly, Miss Schneider survived and gave birth to a healthy baby girl only 2 days after the incident. Now, as is the running theme here, one guy was arrested but released on a complete lack of evidence. But after this assault, authorities began to publicly acknowledge that it was related to the attacks on Bessemer and Maggio. It was unclear if the attacker would strike again, but the people of the West Bank didn't have to wait long, really. Only 5 days after the Schneider assault, another grocery store owner, Joseph Romano, was attacked in his home that he shared with his 2 nieces. The girls woke up to loud sounds coming from their uncle's room next door and went to investigate. Joseph Romano clearly had taken an intense blow to the head, but the girls saw the assaulter flee the house. Romano died 2 days later from severe head trauma, but thanks to the description from the girls, authorities now had an idea of who or what they were dealing with. The girls described the killer as a dark-skinned, heavy-set male who wore a dark suit and slouched hat. On top of this description, Authorities had several other clues to work off of. The location of the crime was ransacked, but nothing was ever stolen. The panels of the victim's doors or windows were chiseled away to gain access into the home. The killer used the victim's axe and blades that they kept outside. And lastly, the majority of the victims were Italian. With this attack, the city grew into an absolute frenzy. There was an axe murderer on the loose,